Part 1. The Whispering Killin, the quiet heart of a forgotten village. Hidden among swaying bamboo groves and the misty curve of low blue mountains, there lived a potter named Wen Yu. His home was old and sloping, built of wood that creaked gently in the wind, nestled beside a stream that babbled stories to the mossy rocks day and night. When he was not young, nor was he old. His beard was silver at the chin but black at the sides, and his eyes always seemed as if they had just awakened from a deep and pleasant dream. Every morning, before the birds began their soft conversations, when you would sit on the low step of his workshop, warm tea in hand, and listen to the world breathe. He was known across the province not for bowls or vases, but for something much more unusual: porcelain pillows. Cool to the touch, shaped like clouds or moonlit boats, each one glazed with painted dreams. A fish leaping across the sky, a girl combing starlight through her hair, a plum tree blooming in midwinter. Yet it wasn't just the beauty that drew people to Wen Yu's work. It was said that whoever rested their head upon one of his pillows would dream with startling honesty. Some saw their childhood homes as they once were, others relived forgotten promises, and just a few woke with tears on their cheeks, unsure if they had been sad or healed. Wen Yu never explained his craft. He only smiled, eyes glinting like water under moonlight. But the truth was, the secret of the pillows was not his alone. It began many years ago, on a summer night, heavy with the scent of lotus and wood smoke, when you had stayed late in his workshop, shaping a particularly difficult piece, one shaped like a curled cat, its back arched in sleep. He worked in silence, save for the rustle of bamboo and the low crackle of the kiln. Then, just as the flame in the hearth dimmed to embers, when you heard it, a whisper, not in words, not exactly, but a feeling, like a thought brushing against his skin, and the pillow, still wet with clay, seemed to hum in his hands. And in that hum, when you felt something strange, a glimpse of a woman sitting at a window, watching snow fall gently through the dark. He didn't know her face, yet he knew she had once meant something to him. He blinked. The image faded. The pillow cooled. That night, when you did not sleep, instead, he watched the stars and wondered if dreams could be shaped not by the mind, but by the hands. From then on, every pillow he made was treated with quiet ceremony. He rose before dawn, brewed jasmine tea, and played soft flute music as he spun the wheel. He spoke to the clay, not with words, but with intentions. Let this one carry truth. Let this one soothe sorrow. Let this one remember joy. And something unseen, always listened. Years passed. The village grew quieter as the younger folk moved to cities, and the old paths became overgrown with wildflowers. But still, people came, travelers from the capital, monks on pilgrimage, weary scholars with ink-stained robes. They came with coin, but more often with stories. When you always listened before choosing which pillow would suit their soul, he kept no records. Only dreams mattered. But one evening, as the moon rose low and golden behind the hills, when you stood before his kiln and felt an unfamiliar hush, the kind of silence that makes even the wind hold its breath, inside the kiln, nestled among the other cooling pieces, was a new pillow, unlike any he had made before. It was smooth and oval, shaped like a river stone, glazed in deep midnight blue, with a single silver line curling across it like a falling leaf. When you had no memory of crafting it, yet there it was, and it was humming. He picked it up carefully. The hum was faint, but steady like a lullaby remembered from infancy. Holding it, when you saw no visions, only felt a deep stillness settle over him, like the hush between dreams, he placed it on a wooden stand near his sleeping mat. That night, for the first time in many years, he would lay his own head on one of his creations, and what he dreamed would not only change his heart, it would begin a journey, one dream, one memory, one whisper at a time, a journey. The pillow itself would one day remember. Part 2. The dream that forgot its name. The night was soft, the air thick with the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. Crickets sang in the garden, their rhythms slow and steady, like a lullaby for the earth. A single paper lantern swayed gently outside Wen Yu's workshop, casting golden circles on the worn wooden floorboards. Inside, the potter lay still. His chest rose and fell with a peaceful rhythm, one hand resting near the edge of the porcelain pillow, the one shaped like no other, glazed in midnight blue, with that curious silver line. It cradled the back of his head, cool and smooth like riverstone, grounding him as he drifted into sleep. But this sleep was different. It did not come gradually, nor did it pull him into the usual fog of half-formed thoughts and drifting colors. Instead, it was as if the pillow had reached up and tugged him gently through a door he hadn't seen before, and on the other side, silence. Then, the distant sound of water. When you opened his eyes, not in the waking world, but in the dream, he stood beside a vast lake, its surface still and dark as lacquered ink. Mist floated across the water in pale ribbons, brushing his ankles like silk threads. The sky above was the same deep blue as the pillow, with stars that shimmered but did not twinkle, steady, watching. He looked down. His hands were young, not as he had seen them for years, worn by clay and fire, but smooth, with slender fingers unscarred by time. A voice called from across the lake. He couldn't see who it belonged to, but the voice was warm, familiar in a way that filled his chest with aching sweetness. He stepped forward, the earth beneath his feet soft like moss, and the lake rippled faintly as if it too had heard the voice. "Come," it said, "we're not done remembering. When you didn't, question. In dreams, questions are soft-edged things, easily lost." He walked as he moved along the shore. Memories rose, not full ones, but fragments, the sound of bells in springtime, the feeling of ink drying on a letter he never sent, a laugh that once made the walls of his workshop feel less empty, and then a house appeared in the mist. It was made of gray stone and warm wood, nestled beside a crooked willow tree whose branches dipped into the lake like lazy fish. He knew this place, had drawn it in the margins of his notebooks as a boy, had dreamed of building it with someone, once. Inside, a fire flickered, even though there was no wind. He stepped closer. The door creaked open with a sigh. The air inside smelled of steamed rice, rain-damp silk, and chrysanthemums. Someone had just left or perhaps had been waiting, and stepped away. On the low table was a cup of tea, still warm. Next to it, a book. When you reached for it, there was no title on the cover, only that same silver line, curling like a falling leaf. He opened it. The pages were blank, and then, slowly, a single word appeared across the first page, as if written by unseen hands: return. When you stared, the fire crackled softly. Outside, the lake shimmered. He closed the book gently and placed it back on the table. There was no rush. Dreams in this place moved like water, slowly, patiently, flowing. Around the stones of time, the door behind him whispered open once more. But this time, no wind followed. Instead, he turned and found himself back in the garden of his workshop, standing under the lantern's quiet glow. The porcelain pillow rested on the mat. Still silent, the dream had ended, or perhaps only paused. When you awoke with the first pale light of morning, the pillow beneath him was cool to the touch, yet not cold, and in his chest, a calmness bloomed. Not happiness exactly, but the quiet certainty that something had begun to stir, something long buried beneath years of clay and routine. He rose, brewed his tea, and stepped outside. The sky was soft gray, the kind that made the mountains look like brushstrokes in a watercolor painting. Birds began to stretch their wings in song. When you did not rush to the wheel that morning. Instead, he placed the midnight pillow beside the others, where it looked like a still pool among streams. It was then that he noticed, just at the edge of the silver line, something new. A crack, not a flaw, but the tiniest of fractures, almost invisible, as if something inside the porcelain had shifted. As if the dream had pressed gently against the shell of the pillow, wanting to be remembered. When you smiled, he knew what to do next. The dream had not given him answers, but it had asked him to return. And so, he would dream again. Part 3. The first fracture for 3 mornings in a row. When you brewed his jasmine tea slower than usual, he had always found peace in routine, sifting clay through his fingers, arranging his brushes in descending order, lighting the kiln just as the first light of dawn brushed the edges of the bamboo grove. But something within him had shifted, just slightly, like the tiny crack now veining the porcelain pillow by his bedside. It was not a break, no, it was delicate, like the lines left in sand by the retreating tide, barely there, and yet undeniable. He could not stop thinking of the dream, the lake, the silent house, the willow tree, dipping its green fingertips into the still water, and that single word written across the book's blank page: return. But return to what? When you sat beside the pillow, fingertips hovering just above its glazed surface, when he finally dared to touch it again, he felt nothing unusual, no hum, no warmth, no whisper, just the cool smoothness of porcelain under his hand. Still, he knew something waited inside it. Some truth, some memory. So, that night, as the sky deepened into dusk and the lanterns began to blink like slow fireflies across the valley, when you did not take up his tools, he did not mix new glazes or prepare more clay. Instead, he bathed, combed his hair with sandalwood oil, and laid once more beside the pillow. Outside, the bamboo rustled like distant music. Inside, he closed his eyes, and sleep came gently, like silk folding over his body. This time, the dream opened in shadow. When you stood beneath a canopy of plum blossoms, the petals were falling slowly, not like snow, but like time itself was loosening. Its grip, they drifted in spirals, soft and white, catching in his hair and on his sleeves. Ahead of him was a narrow path paved with river stones. It curved through a silent garden, lit only by the faint glow of lanterns that seemed to hover without string or flame. The same voice from before whispered, not from far away this time, but from just beside his ear: "You left it too long." He turned. No one, but beside the path stood a stone bench, and on it, the book, the same one from the lake house, midnight blue, a silver line on its cover. When you approached slowly, as if afraid his footsteps might wake the dream, when he opened it, more words had appeared. When a memory is sealed in porcelain, it must be cracked open gently. He ran his fingers across the page. The ink did not smudge. It was dreaming, impossible and true. Then came a scent, faint but clear. Osmanthus. A flower so small, so light, but with a fragrance that lingered like childhood itself. And with it came a rush of something deeper, a memory buried in the scent's bloom. A courtyard, a girl seated by a window, painting tiny golden blossoms onto a porcelain dish. Her lap soft, shaped like bells. Her voice. Do you think dreams remember us, too? When Yu's breath caught, the dream shimmered. He reached for the memory, but it slipped away like a fish through reeds. Then, another word appeared on the page. May, he whispered it aloud. The plum blossoms trembled. The dream faded when you woke before dawn. His heart was quiet but full, like a cup just about to spill. The pillow beneath his head was unchanged. Almost. The tiny crack had grown. Barely, but it had widened, branching slightly along the curve like a thread of silver lightning frozen in time. He did not panic. He did not mourn. He only stared at it in the gray morning light and thought of the word written in the dream-book. May. He hadn't spoken that name in decades. She had once been real. That much he now remembered, but how much had been lost? He left his tea untouched. That morning, the kill remained cold. Instead, he stepped out into the misty garden, his sandals soft against the dewy stone path. The air smelled of moss and smoke, of stories waiting to be told. The bamboo swayed overhead like tall, sleepy guardians. And for the first time in years, Wen Yu began sketching not for work, not for customers, but for something else. He drew a garden he had once sat in long ago. He drew a bench beneath plum blossoms. He drew a girl with laughter in her hands. He drew a pillow, split gently down the middle, not broken, not ruined, but opened. As if something precious inside was beginning to wake. Part 4. The garden beneath the ink. The sketch lay on his low table, edges curled slightly from the damp morning air. When you had drawn in silence, without thought, without plan, as if the lines had always existed beneath the paper and only needed to be revealed. A garden, like those once found in Gyeongnan scrolls. Winding paths, a curved bridge, a willow bowing its head in the stillness of a pond, and beneath a plum tree whose blossoms tumbled like stars, she sat. May. He hadn't drawn her face, only the shape of her form, the tilt of her head, the graceful way her hands rested in her lap. It was enough. The memory would come, piece by piece, like mist lifting from a quiet lake. Outside, the morning moved slowly. Bamboo leaves rustled like silk robes brushing against stone. The stream gurgled in soft laughter, a language only the earth could understand. The porcelain pillow sat on a folded cloth by the window, its crack catching the light like a faint smile. When you felt the tug of sleep, long before night came, there was something within him now, ache, not of pain, but of longing. A gentle kind of homesickness for a place that may have never fully existed, or may have only lived inside a dream. He lay down before the sun had set, the sky still pale with early evening, and once again rested his head on the blue-glazed pillow. The hum returned the moment his eyes closed. Low, steady, like the sound of oars dipping into a river, and then, the dream opened. Like a door this time, but like a scroll unrolling, one breath at a time. He was seated on a wooden stool, beside a small table scattered with brushes, inkstones, and scraps of rice paper. The scent of plum blossoms drifted in through an open screen, mingling with the warm, grassy scent of fresh ground ink. Across from him, May was painting. She held the brush lightly, like a reed caught in wind, her strokes fluid and slow. On the porcelain disc in front of her, golden osmanthus petals bloomed beneath her touch. When you watched, not speaking, not moving, her hair was pinned with a single comb of mother of pearl. A thread of ink clung to her wrist, unnoticed. Do you remember this place? She asked without looking up. When Yu's breath caught in his throat. I think so, he whispered. You made me a pillow once, shaped like a peach blossom. The image flickered in his memory. Yes, a pink-glazed pillow, round and soft, painted with a garden scene so delicate it could only be seen in moonlight. Did I? She looked up. Her eyes were not sad, not glad, only still, like water with stories beneath. You said it would help me sleep without forgetting. He reached for the memory, but it slid away again, shimmering like dragonfly wings. Outside the screen, wind passed through the plum branches. A single petal landed on May's painting, and she smiled. But we all forget. Eventually, he wanted to ask her where she'd gone, why she'd left, if she'd left at all. But in dreams, questions turned to vapor. Instead, she dipped her brush in clear water and wrote something on a small scrap of paper. Then she folded it once, twice, and placed it on the windowsill, where the wind lifted it gently and carried it into the night. The kill forgets nothing, she said, voice soft, even when we do. And with that, the scene began to fade. The scent of blossoms, the clink of porcelain, the hush of brushes drying. When you awoke with the faintest trace of plum scent still clinging to the air. The pillow beneath him was warm this time, as if it had held the dream too. He sat up slowly. The sky outside had shifted to pre-dawn gray. No birds yet, only the distant coo of doves and the whisper of water on stone. On the floor beside the pillow was a scrap of paper. He blinked. It hadn't been there before. He reached for it with trembling fingers. A single word had been brushed across it in water and ink. Remember, no signature, no date, just the memory of a brushstroke and the soft echo of a voice that had once painted blossoms into porcelain. When you stood in the stillness of morning, heart quiet and full. Something was unfolding, not quickly, not clearly, but steadily, like a forgotten path emerging from the undergrowth, and the pillow, now gently cracked, waited like a friend by the window. Part 5. The story hidden in clay morning moved slowly through the house, as if the sun itself didn't wish to disturb the quiet within. The walls, steeped in the scent of old wood and tea leaves, seemed to breathe alongside Wen Yu, as he stared at the slip of paper on his table. Remember, he had placed it beside the midnight blue pillow, careful not to let it curl under the weight of breeze. Though his rational mind told him it was part of the dream, another part deeper, older knew better. The way the ink had dried, the faint trace of plum pollen smudged into the edge, it felt too real to dismiss, and the porcelain pillow, now resting in a beam of sunlight, bore a second hairline fracture, thin as a thread, curving delicately like a crescent moon across the surface. Not a break, a beginning. When you did not go to the market that day. Nor did he fire the kill. Instead, he opened the old chest beneath his workbench. Inside, wrapped in silk that smelled faintly of camphor, were the scrolls and notebooks he had forgotten he'd ever saved, sketches from his youth. Early glazes he had once mixed in joyful frustration, and scattered among them, fragments of half-finished poems. He paused over a small leather-bound book, worn smooth at the corners. Inside, pressed flat between two yellowing pages, was a single plum blossom. Still intact, and beneath it a drawing, a woman seated by a round window, the soft suggestion of her profile rendered in just 4 brushstrokes. Beneath her, in tiny ink characters, May, with the late blossoms. Wen Yu's throat tightened. He remembered now, they had once sat together in a courtyard filled with drifting petals. She had asked him to teach her the feeling of clay. He had asked her how she knew when a painting was finished. When it breathes, she had said. That night, he lit the lanterns early. Their golden light flickered softly against the walls as the garden outside faded into deepening blue. He held the midnight pillow with both hands before lying down. It no longer felt like an object, it felt like a doorway. He closed his eyes. Sleep came not like a fall, but like floating. He was in a workshop. Not his current one, but an earlier version. Sunlight, slanting in through bamboo screens. The floor, still unmarred by years of footfall. May stood at the wheel, sleeves rolled high, hands deep in a basin of wet clay. She laughed as it stuck to her fingers. It's colder than I imagined, she said, pressing her palms together like a child playing with mud. When you was younger too. Standing behind her, guiding her hands toward the center of the wheel. Let it rise, he murmured, like breath slow, steady. The clay shifted under their touch, forming a low, rounded shape. Not a bowl, not a vase, a pillow. May tilted her head. Why make pillows from something so hard? He had forgotten she'd asked that, and he had forgotten his own reply. Because dreams need shape, even fragile ones. She smiled, not at the pillow, at him. Then the dream shifted, rippling like the surface of water touched by wind. Now he stood at the kilt. It glowed gently, not with fire, but with memory. Inside, the porcelain pillow floated, suspended as if in moonlight. Its cracks glimmered like threads of silver. A voice heard whispered from somewhere behind him. You tried to forget, but forgetting makes the cracks deeper. When you turned, but the dream was already dimming. A final image lingered before it faded completely. May, standing by a riverbank, holding the blue-glazed pillow in her arms like a child, eyes closed in, a peaceful half-smile. He woke with the first stirrings of birdsong outside. The world was still, the air cool and clear, and beside him, the porcelain pillow now bore a third fracture, thin and winding, tracing the curve of the silver glaze like ivy reaching for light. But when you did not worry, he knew now, the cracks were not signs of damage. They were invitations. Each dream was softening something inside him, gently pressing memory back into the clay of his heart. That morning, for the first time in many years, he sat at the wheel again, not to shape something for others, but to shape something for himself. He pressed his fingers into the clay, whispering as he worked. Let this one carry a memory lost. Let this one open gently. Let this one breathe. The wheel turned. The clay rose, and behind him, though the air was still, a single plum petal drifted down onto the floor. Part 6. Where petals do not fade by midday. When you had finished shaping the new pillow, it sat on the wheel like a slow-breathing creature, round and smooth, its center still glistening with moisture. Unlike his other work, some made to match a traveler's tale, others commissioned with exacting detail, this one was born of nothing but feeling. He hadn't planned its form, yet it had emerged naturally, not rectangular like the traditional song pillows, nor perfectly circular, but gently sloped, like the curve of someone's shoulder leaning into sleep. He touched its edge lightly with the pad of his thumb, and thought, this one remembers being held. The studio was quiet, save for the soft dripping of water from a clay-washed cloth. When you washed his hands, the faint fragrance of earth rising, from his palms. He left the pillow to rest and stepped out into the fading sun. The garden greeted him like an old friend. The osmanthus tree had begun to bloom again, scattering its tiny gold flowers across the stones. He stooped to pick one up, holding it between thumb and forefinger. May used to gather these blossoms into small silk sachets. She claimed they kept bad dreams away, not through any magic, but because they reminded the heart of sweetness. He placed the blossom on the windowsill, beside the midnight pillow, and stood still for a long moment. That night, he returned to the same quiet ritual. Warm tea, dark room, a breeze through the bamboo, the porcelain pillow, now bearing 3 shimmering cracks, hummed faintly beneath his head as he lay down. Sleep unfolded not as a descent, but as a doorway gently opening. He was walking along a corridor. Its floor was made of aged wood, the kind that speaks softly with each step. Along one side, a paper wall glowed with filtered lantern light. On the other side, a series of windows opened to a moonlit courtyard filled with fallen petals. When he moved slowly, drawn forward by a brush bristles dancing across paper, he turned a corner. There she was. May sat at a low table, facing away from him. She was painting directly onto porcelain, a small, oval-shaped pillow like the one he had made earlier that day. Her strokes were delicate, deliberate, gold lines forming a pattern that bloomed outward like mist drifting through trees. She didn't look up, but she spoke. "Do you remember the garden behind the old tea house?" He nodded, though she couldn't see him. There was a bench under the mulberry tree. He murmured, "You left your scarf there once. I kept it for a week before returning it." She smiled, just faintly. "You gave it back folded too perfectly. I knew you'd opened it." He chuckled softly. "It smelled like you." She paused her painting. The room filled with a quiet warmth. Then she turned to him, and her face was finally clear, not idealized, not younger than he remembered. Just May, as she had been in moments, eyes like dusk, hands always doing 2 things at once. She reached for something beside her and held it out to him. It was a pouch, stitched in old silk and tied with a ribbon that had faded to dusk-purple. He opened it. Inside were dried osmanthus blossoms. "Dreams forget what's real," she said softly, "but clay remembers." When you looked down in his hands, the blossoms stirred, and then, just before the dream faded, she whispered, "There's something I left for you. It's hidden in the garden." He woke with the name on his lips. May. That the room was still. The lantern had burned down to a quiet glow. The air smelled faintly of dried blossoms, and in the hush that comes just before dawn, he rose. He didn't question it. He stepped into the garden with bare feet. The stone path cooled beneath him. The stars hung low. The wind was gentle. He knelt beside the osmanthus tree. The ground was soft with fallen petals. Carefully, he pushed some aside with his fingers, feeling the loam, the memory of rain, and then his hand touched something solid. Wrapped in oilcloth, tied with twine, he lifted it gently, unwrapped it. A porcelain pillow, smaller than the ones he made now, painted with a single line of text in May's handwriting, so familiar it made his chest ache. "For when you forget again." When you sat back on his heels, the stars blinked above him. He closed his eyes and cradled the little pillow to his chest. And as the first bird sang its fragile song into morning, he whispered back, "I'm beginning to remember." Part 7. Glaze and Ghost. Light morning unfolded gently, like a silk fan opening over the horizon. When you sat beneath the osmanthus tree, the small, rediscovered pillow still resting in his lap. Its surface was cool, glazed in soft white with faint, lavender undertones. The brushstrokes were delicate, almost hesitant, and the text across its base, "For when you forget again," shimmered faintly in the light, like it had been sealed, not just in porcelain, but in love. He traced the characters with the tip of his finger, remembering the way May used to write. She never pressed hard. Her calligraphy always floated, each stroke like the curl of incense, fragrant and vanishing. When you did not rush to rise, the garden was still, holding the hush of something sacred. Leaves stirred but didn't fall. The world seemed to breathe slowly with him. Inside, the larger midnight blue pillow remained on the windowsill, now cradled in thin morning light. Its cracks were spreading, but tenderly, like a net forming, not to trap, but to hold. He touched its edge before lifting it once again to the head of his mat. The memory pillow had returned to him from the soil of his past. Now, the dream pillow awaited the next breath. That night, he added something new to his ritual. Alongside the warm tea and lantern flame, he placed the small white pillow by his side, as if May might return and need it. Then he lay down and surrendered to the deep, glassy stillness between wakefulness and dreaming. The kill glowed in the dark, but not with fire, no, with something softer, more like moonlight caught in smoke. When you stood just outside the kill room, its paper doors sliding open on their own. Inside, shelves rose up around him like altars, and on every shelf sat porcelain pillows, glowing faintly, chumming at different frequency, like dozens of forgotten dreams singing back to one another. He walked slowly. The glow pulsed as he passed. Some pillows remained cool, silent, others flickered. one painted with a bamboo grove, released a faint scent of sandalwood as he neared. Then he saw it. The midnight pillow. It sat alone on a low platform, beneath a paper lantern that swayed without breeze. Its surface, now lined with cracks, looked less like something damaged and more like something finally open. A voice echoed, not spoken aloud, but within him. Every crack is a place where memory returns. When you approached. As he knelt beside the pillow, a swirl of ink lifted from its surface, rising slowly into the air, like smoke from an invisible brush. The ink gathered into a shape, a garden gate, then a bridged in a girl with a silk scarf wrapped around her wrist. May. He reached out, the image dissolved, but something remained, a scroll, resting beside the pillow. He hadn't seen it before, hadn't dreamed it into being. It simply was. He unrolled it slowly, words in her hand. You, if you are reading this, then the pillow has done its work. It means you have begun to remember, not just me, but yourself. There is no need to search for me. You carry what matters. All the pieces of who we were are already sealed in what we made. Let the cracks deepen. That's how light finds its way back in. I will be with you not in dreams, but in the things that breathe, clay, wind, petals, and if you forget again, sleep gently. I will wait. The scroll curled softly in his hand, the ink still fresh. When you awoke, just as the lantern burned out, the room was dim with the first whisper of dawn. His face was damp, not from sorrow, not entirely. It felt like rain touching stone after a long drought. He turned his head to look at the midnight pillow. Its surface had changed again. A new mark had appeared between the silver cracks, a tiny osmanthus blossom, etched so faintly it could only be seen when the morning light kissed it. Just so. He let out a long breath, like an exhale held for years. Then he whispered into the silence, I remember. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blossoms into the house, and in the space between heartbeats, he thought he heard a brushstroke. Part 8. The breath between firings. The house had always been quiet, but now it felt sacred. After days of silence, wrapped in dreams, when he moved through the rooms, not as their owner, but as their guest, he noticed things he had long forgotten. To see the grain of the floorboards near the window where May used to rest her elbows. The faint stain on the tea cabinet from the one time she'd laughed so hard she spilled an entire pot of chrysanthemum tea. The sketch of a cloud, faint and smudged, on the underside of the ceiling beam drawn in secret on a summer day. Long ago. And in the corner of his studio sat the clay pillow he had shaped after the dream of the lake and the house with no voice. It was drying now, its surface smoothing out slowly as the last of the moisture whispered away. He had not touched it since. He didn't need to. Instead, he sat beside the midnight blue pillow each evening, setting down the scroll May had left in his dream, and lighting a single stick of incense. Not to summon her, not to call back the vision, to keep the door open, softly. That night, as he lay down once more, when you felt no urgency, no need for answers, only a gentle curiosity, like watching the tide roll in, sleep came with a hush. He stood at the edge of a mountain. This one was ancient, curved into the slope of the earth like a sleeping dragon. The fire inside was not angry, it pulsed, like a living heart, slow and rhythmic. A soft heat radiated from the long tunnel, and stacked along its inner chamber were porcelain pieces in various stages of becoming. When you stepped inside, none of the pots, bowls or pillows were familiar, yet each one stirred something in him. Not recognition, but resonance. Then, in the center of the kiln, he saw a low stone seat. Upon it rested a single, unfinished pillow. The clay had not been glazed. The surface bore the imprint of a thumb, left behind as though the maker had paused mid-breath. Beside it lay a folded note, held in place by a smooth river pebble. When you picked it up, this time the handwriting was his own. To myself, if you are here again, it means the fire has done its work. You were afraid to remember. That's all right. Some memories are too delicate to hold all at once, but you've done well. Let the pillow finish its dreaming. It will know what to do. When you return, open the oldest drawer. There's something there you promised to forget. But it has waited patiently. When you opened his eyes in the dark, no dream had ever let go so gently. The memory of heat still hummed softly behind his ribs, as if the kill's heart fire had passed through him. He sat up slowly. The pillow at his side was glowing faintly, not with light, but with quiet. Its cracks shimmered like stories. The osmanthus mark on its surface looked clearer now, almost alive. The kill in his own studio had gone untouched for days. But that morning, when you cleaned it, he swept the ash, brushed the soot from its edges, ran his hand along its outer shell like one might smooth the back of an old friend. Then he returned inside. The oldest drawer in the corner. Cabinet creaked as he pulled it open. Dust lifted in a lazy cloud. Inside was a cloth bundle, smaller than his palm, tied with a silk thread that had faded into gray-green. He untied it slowly. Inside was a tiny, unfinished porcelain pendant shaped like a plum blossom, and beside it, folded many times, was a letter written in faint, careful brushstrokes. For the time when silence becomes too heavy. Were this, and remember that even in forgetting, you were loved. When you held it in both hands, and for the first time in years, He wept not from pain, but from a fullness too vast to name. The pillow by the window shimmered in the soft morning light. Waiting, its cracks no longer looked like fractures. They looked like rivers, like memory returning home. Part 9. The river beneath the glazed pendant lay cupped in Wen Yu's hand, light as a feather, yet holding the weight of years. Its form, softly rounded petals of a plum blossom, reminded him not of perfection, but of something paused. Something once held in breath and never quite exhaled. He sat in the gentle light of early morning, the studio quiet but alive with presence. The unfinished pillow he had shaped days before was now dry, its form still pure, untouched by glaze. When you glanced toward it, then toward the midnight blue pillow resting near his sleeping mat. The older pillow no longer hummed audibly, but somehow it breathed, and it seemed to be listening. That evening, when you prepared the studio as he once had in his earliest days, long before fame, before the steady stream of requests, before he forgot why he began shaping dreams at all, he lit the lamps softly, brewed tea without rush. He swept the floor with care, humming a melody he could not name. And then, with the small plum blossom pendant tied around his neck, he sat before the unfinished pillow. He took his brushes, prepared the glaze, and spoke aloud, not to the room, not even to the pillow, but to memory itself. This one is not for sale, not for show, not for show, not for anyone but the one who remembers me, even when I forget myself. He dipped the brush. His hand moved slowly, as if guided by something not quite seen. First, a willow branch, curved like a dancer's arm, then the outline of a bench, a single falling petal, a house in the mist, a name written in strokes so faint they faded before the ink dried. May. He worked long into twilight, the soft clink of brush against bowl the only sound. When the glaze was finished, he let the pillow rest, and turned, as he always did now, to the midnight blue pillow that had started everything. He lay beside it, hand resting lightly on its curved side. His eyes closed with the hush of a curtain being drawn. The dream came differently, not as a place, not even as a story, but as water. He stood ankle-deep in a river that glowed with silver light. The current did not push or pull, it simply flowed through him, gentle and clean. On the far bank stood a younger version of himself. Potter's apron tied high, sleeves rolled to the elbow, clay beneath the fingernails. He was laughing not at anything in particular, just with the easy delight of someone who believed time was endless. Beside him stood May. Not a vision, not a ghost, just May, as she had been in quiet moments, in quiet gardens, brushing flower from her cheeks, leaning her head against his shoulder after a long day. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood together, watching the river carry fragments downstream. When you looked down, the water was filled with pieces, glazed porcelain shards, ink-smeared scraps of poems, tiny painted fish, a silk scarf drifting like cloud. He stepped forward. The river did not deepen. It welcomed him. When he reached the far bank, he did not touch May. He didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward and placed something in his hand. It was the pendant, but now it was whole, glazed with the soft shimmer of moonlight. At its center, a tiny crack, barely visible, filled with gold. Kintsugi, he whispered. The art of honoring the break. May smiled. Now it remembers you too. And then, with the wind lifting softly behind her, she turned and faded not away, but into him. When you woke in the softest hour before dawn, the pendant around his neck was warm. He sat up and turned to the midnight pillow. A final crack had formed overnight. It branched delicately across the top like the last stroke in a calligraphy pestamark that completes the meaning. He lifted the pillow gently and held it to his chest. There was no hum now, only stillness, but not empty, full. Later that day, as the sky turned golden behind the bamboo, when you placed the unfinished glazed pillow into the kiln, the fire burned low and steady, just enough to seal, not scorch. He watched the flame, not as a craftsman, but as a guardian. As the heat whispered around the porcelain, he closed his eyes. And thanked it for carrying dreams across the fire, for holding memory in its curved silence. In the quiet, he could almost hear May say, "The river flows through you now," and it did. In every breath, in every brushstroke, in every crack filled with light. Part 10. What fire does not burn the kill? Fire had gone cold by morning, when you stepped into the studio barefoot, as if not to wake the air. The scent of clay, ash, and a faint trace of osmanthus drifted around him, familiar now, like the quiet presence of someone who no longer needed to speak to be felt. He knelt before the kill, its mouth yawning open like a story waiting to be finished. Inside, resting gently on a bed of fine ash, was the glazed pillow. He did not rush to lift it. Instead, he sat before it, hands folded in his lap, and simply looked. The glaze had cooled into a pale river gray, touched with soft lavender. Along its edge, the willow branch he had painted curled like a closing hand, and across the center, almost invisible unless the light caught it just right, May's name glimmered beneath the surface like a memory sealed in sleep. But it was the crack that held his gaze. One single line, running from the upper curve of the pillow to its base. In the kiln, it had spread wider than he had planned. But when you did not see it as a flaw, he traced it gently with his finger. And then he reached for a small pot of golden lacquer. He worked in silence that day. The act of repairing with gold kintsugi was a ritual of honoring what had been broken. Not to erase the damage, but to let it shine. To let the wound speak its own story. He brushed the gold slowly into the crack, filling it not only with warmth, but with memory. As he worked, the sky outside turned the color of old silk. Bamboo shadows slid across the walls. When it was done, he stepped back. The pillow gleamed not loudly, not for praise, but with the quiet confidence of something healed. It sat beside the midnight blue pillow. Now, as if the two had been waiting to meet, when he smiled softly, one that remembers, one that dreams. That night, for the first time, he placed the new pillow beneath his head. The midnight pillow remained close, like a lantern at the edge of sleep that when he closed his eyes. This time, the dream opened with sound. A tea kettle boiling, softly, the hush of pages turning, wind moving through a paper screen, then laughter, not a memory, not an echo, but laughter in real time. He was in the garden. May sat beside a small table, pouring tea into two uneven cups. Her robe was light gray, embroidered with falling leaves. She looked up as he approached and gestured to the empty seat. When you sat. Without speaking, she smiled. You finished it. He nodded. She passed him a cup. The tea was warm, not hot. Sweet, but not overpowering. He took a sip. It tasted like spring coming back after a long winter. You always thought fire would burn everything away, May said gently, watching the sky above them turn the softest shade of peach. But fire only reveals what endures. When you looked down at his hands, at the faint golden dust still clinging to his skin, even here, I didn't want to forget, he said, but I did. She reached out, took his hand, and yet you found your way back. The wind stirred. Osmanthus blossoms floated across the path like snow that remembered the sun. Tell me, she said, voice like dusk, what will you do now that you remember? He didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes and breathed. And when he opened them, he was awake, still in the studio, still lying on the new pillow, which now held his head with the same calm grace as the one before. The gold line shimmered beneath his cheek. And somewhere in the air, whether from memory or from something more, he could still smell the tea. When you sat up and looked at the two pillows side by side, one filled with dreams, one filled with return. He didn't need to sleep to see her anymore. She lived now in the fire, the clay, the glaze, in every petal that fell without rush, in every crack that held the light. Part 11. The sound of drying ink the next morning began with rain soft and steady, like a brush dipped in water and pulled gently across the rooftops. When you stood beneath the overhang of the studio, watching droplets gather on the edges of bamboo leaves before falling one by one into the moss below, the garden looked different in the rain, older, somehow, more knowing. The stones were darker, their patterns clearer. Fallen osmanthus blossoms clung to the path, bright gold against the gray. Inside, the two pillows sat together, one deep blue, lined with silver cracks, the other glazed in river gray, with gold-like sunlight running through its fracture. They didn't speak, and yet their presence filled the room like the warmth of two lanterns lit for each other. When he turned to his writing table, it had been years since he'd picked up a calligraphy brush for himself. Most of his writing had become practical customer notes, kill records, glaze experiments. But now, something called him to the paper, not to explain, not to instruct, to remember. He ground the ink slowly, letting its scent bloom in the air. When he dipped the brush and brought it to paper, the words did not come in rushes. They arrived, like rain, drop by drop, each stroke full of breath. Asterisk, a pillow, cracked with care, still holds the weight of dreams. What breaks need not vanish, it simply begins again, softer. Asterisk, he wrote, for hours, not poetry, not story, just fragments. Whispers. Memories he didn't want to forget again. He wrote of May's laugh when she painted the underside of her own teacups just to surprise the drinker. Of the way she walked barefoot when it rained, to feel the earth's memory in her soles. Of her belief that clay had a soul, if only someone would listen long enough. And he wrote about the pillow, not just the one in porcelain, but the one she had once rested her head on, long ago, before the forgetting. That night, when you lit no lamp, the studio remained dark except for the occasional flicker of lightning. Through the distant hills, he placed the two pillows side by side near his sleeping mat. Then, carefully, he unfurled the parchment he had written and placed it between them. A bridge of words, a thread between past and present. He laid his head down. Sleep did not come as a story. This time, it came as stillness. He sat at the old writing table beneath the plum tree. Rain drifted sideways, gentle, as if it didn't want to disturb the ink drying on the page. May sat across from him, one hand cupped under her chin. She wasn't painting. She wasn't writing. She was just watching him. Her presence was light, like mist that chose to stay. What are you writing? She asked. He didn't look up. I'm not sure. I think I'm writing you back. She smiled, not wide, just enough. That's all I ever wanted. They sat like that for a long time, no longer needing to speak. The rain slowed. The paper dried. And when she finally rose to go, she didn't disappear. She simply walked a little farther away. Into the trees, where the dream folded back into the sound of leaves. When you woke slowly, as if he'd never fully left the dream, parchment was still between the two pillows, but now, someone or something had added to it. A single phrase written in different handwriting, familiar and rounded. Some dreams become true by being remembered. He touched the ink. Still damp. He didn't question how. He only whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the world was waiting, quietly, to begin again. Part 12. The shape memory leaves behind. The air, after rain, carried a strange stillness, soft and deep, like the world had paused mid-breath when you opened the windows wide that morning, letting the scent of damp earth and clean leaves drift through the studio. The birds, cautious at first, had begun their morning songs again. The stream behind the house gurgled with more confidence, as if encouraged by the sky. He took his tea on the steps, watching the mist rise in curls from the stones. In his lap, he held the parchment, the one he'd written during yesterday's quiet storm. His own words, and hers. His ink, and hers. A conversation across time. Beside him sat the two pillows, one midnight blue, the other gray gold, each bearing its own fracture, its own thread of return. They looked like companions, now not relics of a past life, but two halves of something whole. He didn't plan what came next. He simply followed the stillness. That afternoon, when you began shaping a third pillow, the clay was cooler than usual, perhaps from the rain, or perhaps from the quiet that had settled in him. His hands moved, slowly, not to create something new, but to continue something already begun. This pillow was rounder than the others, less precise, as if it had been worn soft by time. He pressed a small spiral into its center. An old symbol from a temple scroll, May, once showed him, means return. She'd whispered then, tracing it on his palm with her fingertip. He remembered now. He remembered everything, and as he worked, a small question rose in him, not urgent, not sharp, just gentle. What if the pillow hadn't brought the dreams? What if the dreams had brought the pillow? That night, he placed the newly shaped clay on the low shelf to dry. It would take days, maybe longer. But there was no hurry now. He lit no incense, no tea. He didn't need a ritual to reach her anymore. He simply lay beside the two finished pillows and closed his eyes. In the dream, the house was gone. Not destroyed, not there, as though it had been gently erased, stroke by stroke, until only the earth remained. But the garden remained, the stones, the trees, the bench, the air, and standing there in the soft grass, barefoot and quiet, was May. She wore a robe, the color of wet silk. Her hair was pinned loosely, strands falling around her cheek. She looked at him not with longing, not with sadness, but with knowing. "You're almost ready," she said. He nodded. To let go, she tilted her head. No, to live with it. He stepped closer. She opened her hands. In her palms lay three things: a tiny, unfinished porcelain shard, the pendant he'd found in the drawer, and a folded piece of paper. The paper gently and opened it. No writing, just a soft imprint of a plum blossom pressed into its surface like a seal, the kind that doesn't claim authorship, but presence. He looked up. She had stepped away into the trees again, but this time, she didn't fade. She walked deeper in, becoming part of the green, part of the stillness. When you awoke before sunrise, the sky outside the studio glowed soft pearl gray. He sat up slowly, feeling no urgency, no ache, just warmth. The pillows beside him shimmered faintly. The unfinished one waited silently on the drying shelf. He touched the spiral. He had pressed into it, still damp, still changing. And for the first time in years, when you whispered, not a name, not a memory, but thank you. To the clay, to the fire, to the cracks that held the light, and to the dream that had brought him all the way back to himself. Part 13. The silence between shapes. Days passed like petals, falling unhurried, when you no longer waited for dreams to return him to the past. He had learned by now, the past was not a country he had left behind. It was the water he drank, the warmth in the kiln, the lines in his palms. It lived not only in memory, but in movement. The soft press of his thumb into clay, in the pause before each brushstroke. The new pillow was almost dry now. He checked it each morning, gently running a fingertip along the spiral he had carved. At its center, it felt like something breathing just beneath the surface. He didn't rush it. Each day, he wrote a little more on parchment, on old scraps of paper, even once on a leaf he found pressed between the pages of a forgotten book. Nothing grand, just fragments. Stillness holds more than sound. Some things must break to hold warmth. A dream is a place you build with your eyes closed. He placed these notes near the two finished pillows, not as offerings, but as conversation. He didn't expect replies anymore, but sometimes, just sometimes, he would find a phrase added in a different hand, or a tiny osmanthus blossom pressed between his papers. The house was alive in a new way, and he moved through it now with reverence. That night, when you did not lie down beside the pillows, instead, he placed the unfinished one, now nearly dry, in the center of the studio floor, and surrounded it with the others. The midnight blue pillow that first cracked open his memories, and the gray gold one born from his dreams and returned by fire. He lit 3 lanterns and let their light fall gently over the trio. Then he knelt before them, not as a potter, not as a man haunted by memory, but as someone preparing to witness something sacred. He closed his eyes, and this time, the dream came as silence. It was a space without walls, without floor, a place where only light and quiet existed, and in the center, hovering like a slow breath, was the third pillow, still unglazed, still soft, but glowing. Not from heat, from intention. When you stepped toward it, and as he did, the pillow began to change, not in shape, but in presence. It was still clay, still form, but it was also every version of itself that had ever been imagined. He saw May shaping it beside him, her hands covered in slip, her laughter catching on the wind. He saw his younger self pressing his thumb into the spiral, eyes wide with wonder. He saw the pillow as it would be one day, cracked, golden, rested upon by someone else who would never know their names. And he heard, faintly, the quiet voice of his own soul whisper, "Let this be the one that carries no sorrow, only the weight of rest." He opened his eyes. The lanterns were still burning. The pillows remained where he had placed them, but the unfinished one now bore a tiny a flaw, but a beginning, a small, perfect line across the spiral. It had cracked before the fire. When you understood, some things open, not through heat, but through time. He reached forward and ran his thumb across the fracture. It hummed not audibly, but in his chest, a gentle, knowing vibration. Like a bell that had not been rung in years. Later, he wrote just one line before sleeping. "I am not afraid of forgetting anymore, because now, I live inside the remembering." And when he lay down, he did not reach for any pillow. He simply rested his head on the mat and smiled. The pillows could dream for him. Now part 14. What the clay knew, all along the days had grown shorter. Shadows spilled earlier across the studio floor, and the scent of the air turned crisp and faintly smoky, like pages being turned somewhere just beyond sight. Autumn was arriving in its quiet way, brushing the garden with gold and rust, folding time gently at the edges. When you moved through each day like a man no longer searching, not because he had found everything, but because he had stopped trying to carry it all. The third pillow, the one shaped most recently, now rested in the kill. Its small, spiral crack had dried clean, and pale still visible, but no longer fragile. It would be ready for firing tomorrow, but tonight, he let it rest. Some transformations could not be rushed. Instead, he turned to something else, something he had not touched in many years, an old wooden box, tucked behind a beam high in the rafters, tied shut with a simple cotton ribbon. He brought it down and opened it slowly. Inside were pieces of his earliest work, awkward shapes, uneven glazes, small pots that leaned too far or cracked too early. But also hidden among the humble beginnings was a single porcelain plaque. On its surface, the first poem May ever wrote for him. Clay forgets its shape, but not your hands. Fire will not save it, only your touch can make it sing again. He ran his fingers along the edge. How young they had both been, then hopeful, unfinished. And yet somehow, the clay had always known where they were going. It had been the only one who could wait without growing weary. That night, he set the plaque beside the 3 pillows, the midnight blue one, with its deep silver veins of memory, the gray gold one, born from fire and forgiveness, the soft spiral one, still unglazed, already bearing its first quiet truth. He placed the plaque before them like an offering, a bow to all that had shaped him. Then he sat quietly in the moonlight that slid across the floor, and waited for sleep, not as an escape, but as a gentle arrival. The dream came as a room, not familiar, not strange, simply ready. A single paper window glowed with soft light. In the center, a low table, a brush, a bowl of ink. And beside it, May. She did not speak. Instead, she took his hand and guided it to the brush. She dipped it for him, set the paper before him, then let go. When you hesitated, the silence in the dream held no pressure, only possibility. He lowered the brush and wrote, "Some cracks never close. That is how the light stays in." He looked up. She nodded, just once. And in the dream's final moment, she placed her forehead gently to his, as if sealing something. They're not a goodbye, but a quiet forever. When he woke with the early wind, the kill waited. He did not rush. He made tea, opened the windows, lit one lantern. Then, with both hands, he lifted the third pillow and walked it to the kill. As he placed it on the stone shelf, he whispered, "Remember not who we were, but what we held," and closed the kill door. The fire would come. And the pillow would become what it always had been meant to be, whole, even in its fracture, waiting gently for a head full of dreams. Part 15. The dream that stays. The kill burned low through the night, not with urgency, but with intention. The fire moved like breath, slow, steady, ancient. When you sat beside it, wrapped in his old robe, the steam from his tea curling upward, like incense toward the rafters. He did not stir the coals. He did not peek inside. He simply waited. There was no anxiety now. No ache of needing the piece to turn out perfectly. Perfection had long since ceased to be his compass. He watched the flames cast flickers on the studio walls, on the parchment notes, on the 2 finished pillows that now rested like elders beside the fire. The midnight blue one, cradle of his returning. The gold-veined one, vessel of his remembering. And now, in the kiln, the final one, the soft spiral, marked by time before fire. He closed his eyes and slept. This time, the dream did not come as memory, not as garden, or house, or river. It came as breath, just breath, in and out. A rhythm, older than words. There was no need for a scene, no faces or places, only warmth, and a sense that everything was held. As if a pillow of clay, but of time itself had finally formed beneath him. And in that infinite quiet, when you heard May's voice one last time, not beside him, not across from him, but within him. What we shaped is not just porcelain. It's a place, a resting place for dreams that have nowhere else to go. He smiled. The kiln cooled slowly, whispering in the dark. By morning, the fire had stilled to ash. When you opened the door with both hands, and there it was, the 3rd pillow, pulled soft in shape, smooth in glaze, and along its spiral of fine gold, seam already formed. As if the fire had known exactly where the healing belonged, he lifted it gently. It was warm, and in that warmth was everything, not just May's memory, or the quiet pain of forgetting, but something more, peace. Later, he placed all 3 pillows on the wooden bench beneath the window. Light pooled around them like water. He made tea for 2, not out of habit, out of presence. And then, before sleep, he wrote one final note. To whoever finds these one day, rest your head, and do not be afraid. These pillows were made by someone who learned how to forget gently, and remember kindly. They do not carry sorrow, only dreams that wish to stay a little longer. He folded the note, slipped it beneath the spiral pillow, then lay down, not beside the pillows, this time, but with one beneath his head. It welcomed him like an old friend, and as the last light of evening faded into the hush of night, when you let go, not into forgetting. But into dreaming, the kind that never has to end.